You're listening to episode 12 of Liz's Healthy Table.
Looking for a healthy new way to feed your family without the hassle and hype? Welcome to Liz's Healthy Table, where your host, registered dietitian nutritionist Liz Weiss, serves up fresh and flavorful recipes with a tasty side of science, good nutrition, and fun. Are you and your family ready for some wholesome food that tastes great too? Don't change that dial. Your food adventure starts here.
Welcome to the show, everyone. Today, we'll be jumping headfirst into a topic that's near and dear to my heart, omega-3 fats. Now, I like to think of my show as more apron than lab coat, so I promise not to get too sciencey on the show and instead to give you lots of delicious ideas for getting more of this heart-healthy fat into your family's diet. Well, there'll be a little bit of science. Sorry, hard to avoid it because there's so much cool stuff to know about omega-3 fats. Anyway, so many benefits. We have got a great show for you today. I've got a recipe I created just for you for teriyaki salmon, snow pea, and carrot packets. Super easy. I promise your kids are going to absolutely love this recipe. I'm also going to tell you about all the health benefits. There are benefits for your heart, your brain, your eyes. We're going to talk about food sources, supplements. There's a little bit of confusion about supplements, so we're going to clear that up. I'm going to tell you how much omega-3 you and your family need each day. I'm going to give you all these resources in the show notes from today's show. I'm also going to link to an online quiz to help you and your family figure out whether you're getting enough omega-3s in your diet or if you're falling short. To shed light on the exciting subject of omega-3 fatty acids and to share his family's favorite recipes is today's guest, Adam Ismail. And Adam is the executive director of GOED. GOED is the global organization of EPA and DHA omega-3's. And GOED is the special sponsor for my podcast today. So thank you, GOED. They're actually, besides sponsoring the show today, they're sponsoring a giveaway for all of you guys. And what it is a salmon sampler and a cookbook. The cookbook is called Good Fish. And the salmon sampler is fantastic because it comes from a company called Vital Choice. You're going to get skinless sockeye salmon. You're going to get skin on king salmon. You're going to get skin on silver salmon. You're going to get a salmon marinade. So it's a sampler with salmon and this cookbook and the marinade. And it's going to come frozen. It's a value of $129. Wow, this is a great giveaway. So my show notes, I'm going to have a link there on the show notes to tell you more about the sampler, and you'll be able to enter the giveaway by visiting those show notes. Anyway, Adam and I have a few big things in common. We both have degrees from Boston University, and we both love salmon, which is one of nature's richest sources of omega-3s. Adam, it turns out, speaks Japanese and Spanish, so we have nothing in common when it comes to that. I speak a little bit of French, but not too much. Anyway, he's an interesting guy, and he's got a lot to share. Before we invite him onto the show, I just need to thank our sponsors for today's show. Obviously, GOED, a special sponsor, but also Zespri Sun Gold Kiwi Fruit. The Sun Golds, I talk about them at the top of every show. They have a tropical sweet taste. They're this beautiful golden color. I'm actually doing a cooking class with a group of little kids next week, and I'm going to bring along some Sun Golds. The kids are going to sample them, and then we're going to add them to smoothies. And so I love adding them to smoothies, but I also love to just slice them in half and scoop out the fruit with a spoon. You can learn more at zesprikiwi.com. I'd also like to thank Bush's Beans. They are versatile. They are nutritious, and you can learn more at bushbeans.com. And finally, I'd like to thank Super Healthy Kids. They have an amazing blog filled with family-pleasing recipes. And if you're looking for seafood recipes after today's show, you will definitely want to head over to superhealthykids.com. Okay, let's start today's show. Let's dig in. Let's talk about omega-3s. Adam, welcome to Liz's Healthy Table.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So tell everybody a little bit about yourself. We'll talk about GOED in a minute, but tell everybody who you are.
Sure. I guess the best way to describe me is I've kind of been a traveler. I've lived all over the world. I've got a great family that I love a lot. We've got 2 kids, and actually we just had our first grandkid about a year and a half ago.
Congratulations.
So, yeah, thank you. It's been an exciting couple of years for us. But, I think that if I was going to describe myself, it's really, I think the world traveler is the big thing. I mean, I travel a lot for my job, but I've also lived in Spain and Japan and Ecuador and Peru and even Australia for a short period of time. So I've really kind of lived a lot of places. I've been exposed to a lot of people. And actually, one of the reasons I'm passionate about seafood is because you see seafood in all of these cultures all over the world. And it's kind of one of the things that ties a lot of different people together under one umbrella.
I like that. So we're all connected with seafood.
Yeah, absolutely.
So talk a little bit about GOED. Just tell everybody, I mean, I obviously shared the name in the intro to the show, but what is the organization all about?
Sure. GOED actually is an acronym that stands for the Global Organization for EPA and DHA Omega-3's, which is a real mouthful, which is why we go by the acronym GOED. But we are, as the name implies, an organization that really focuses on trying to increase consumer education and awareness about EPA and DHA, which are the 2 types of omega-3s that you find most readily in seafood. And we also work to make sure that consumers have access to high quality omega-3 products. So we set quality standards for the industry. We help police the claims that companies are making to make sure they're not misleading consumers. And most importantly, I think what we do is we try to grow global consumption to sufficient levels because most of the world is not eating enough omega-3s.
Right. And so you're the executive director. Do you have a background in food or are you just a foodie?
A little bit of both. I don't have a food science background and I'm certainly not a scientist, but I've worked with omega-3s for almost 20 years, 10 years with GOED. And I've worked in the food industry as well as the nutritional supplement industry. So I actually started my career as a strategy consultant, helping companies in the nutrition industry look at how they could make their strategies better. And through that, I was exposed to a lot of different companies and a lot of different aspects of the industry. And the one thing that kind of kept popping up was omega-3s because it's got a lot of science behind it. It's very clear that it plays a very important role in the body. And so it was something that I was just kind of drawn to. It was a very easy thing to fall in love with.
Mm-hmm. I'm pretty obsessed with omega-3s. And the reason is that, well, obviously I love salmon. Not obviously, but I'm saying it now. I love salmon. And years ago, Simon, who's now almost 19, he got a concussion. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but when he got that concussion, I started to give him omega-3s. But I want to just back up before we get into these health benefits. Just explain to everybody, like, what's EPA, what's DHA, and is the omega-3 that you get in salmon, let's say, different from the omega-3 you would get in something like walnuts?
Sure. I don't want to get too technical, but omega-3s are actually a family of fatty acids, just like omega-6s and omega-9s, which are other groups of fats that consumers might have heard of. But they're all what are called polyunsaturated fats, which means that they are highly unsaturated. And so they're basically the exact opposite of a saturated fat. They have longer carbon chains in the molecules. But really what's interesting about it is that they're required for your body to function in an optimal way. They're incorporated into the membranes of every cell in your body. They help govern how your genes are expressed, what types of proteins your cells produce. So they play a big role in how the body functions. And because omega-3s are a family of fats, there's different types of omega-3s within that family. The ones that you most commonly find in plants are alpha-linolenic acid, ALA, and stearidonic acid, SDA. And those 2 fatty acids the body needs to convert them to EPA and DHA.
Those are the long chain, right? EPA and DHA. Mm-hmm.
Those are the ones that you find in seafood. And so if you consume a lot of them from plant oils, your body needs to convert them. And your ability to convert them depends on things like your genetics, the other things you're eating in your diet, the quantity you're eating. a wide variety of factors. And so in many ways, the reason we exist and the reason we try to get people to eat EPA and DHA is we know that generally people in a Western diet are not good converters of omega-3s. And so the best way to get it is to eat them directly, either by consuming more seafood or taking a supplement. There is one, I don't want to gross anyone out, but there is one non-seafood form of EPA and DHA that's a really good source, and that's actually to eat animal brains.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I know. It's not very popular
No.
in the United States, but there are some cultures where they eat a lot of things like sheep brains or cow brains. So, mad cow disease kind of put the end to that in a lot of countries. But there are still some microcultures out there that eat them in significant amounts.
Okay, we will not be recommending that on this podcast. Thank you very much, but good to know. So people who eat lots of non-seafood sources of omega-3, they still get the benefits, but it's not nearly as effective as if you were to consume salmon and other foods like that. So which foods are the richest in these long-chain EPA and DHA omega-3 fats?
Well, it's really seafood, and particularly within seafood, the fatty fish. They tend to be things like tuna, salmon, and then a lot of smaller species like herring, anchovy, mackerel, those types of fish.
Hey, what about sardines? Can't forget about sardines.
Oh, yes. Can't forget about sardines. Yes, those are also a great source. And these fish are the ones that tend to swim in colder waters. And, EPA and DHA actually have very low freezing points. And so one view is that part of the reason these fish tend to have higher omega-3 levels is because they incorporate them into the flesh of their skin, so it's easier to swim around in these very cold waters. I don't think that's really proven yet, but that's one of the hypotheses out there in the marine biology world.
Mm-hmm. So we're talking flesh, we're talking brains. What's happening to this show today, Adam? My gosh. So
Yeah.
What are the health benefits of omega-3s? We always talk about them being heart healthy. I mean, there are, thousands of studies out there about omega-3s. So give us some of the highlights about like heart health and eye health, and then let's talk about brain health.
Yeah, sure. You're right. There are thousands of studies. In fact, there are more than 30,000 published scientific papers on EPA and DHA and almost 4,000 human clinical trials. So it's one of the most researched compounds we're aware of, and by far it's the most researched nutrient. So it is important. One of the issues when I talk about omega-3s is a lot of people think it might be snake oil because it works in a lot of different systems of the body. But if you think about it from the point of view of it helps your cells optimally function, then it makes a little more sense why it plays a role in the brain and the eyes and the heart. But, I think most people know omega-3s are good for your heart. They play a few different roles there. I think the science is pretty convincing that they reduce things like your triglycerides, higher doses, they reduce your blood pressure, they reduce your risk of coronary heart disease mortality, they reduce your heart rate variability, they bring your heart rate down slightly. So, it has a lot of positive effects within the heart. And then, from your heart, you move out to your arteries and your veins, and there's a lot of evidence that it promotes proper endothelial function, meaning how those arteries and veins work, essentially.
They're more flexible, right? Which is good.
Yeah,
you don't want them to be stiff. You want them to be flexible. Oh, and I want to back up and just tell people that triglycerides, which Adam just mentioned, that's a bad blood fat. So we don't want that to be sky high. And so eating omega-3 foods or taking supplements, having it in your diet can lower triglycerides. So that's another good thing.
Yeah, and I do have to say that when you bring up lipids, of course, the one lipid group everybody knows about is cholesterol. A lot of people actually consume omega-3 supplements because they think it will help their cholesterol levels. But the science is pretty clear there that omega-3s don't really play a role in cholesterol reduction. So, while it's great that people are taking it, if they're taking it for that reason, they're probably not going to find a big benefit.
But they will see a reduction in the triglycerides.
Yes, absolutely. Which is actually in the total cholesterol calculation, that's a small component of the total cholesterol number, but it's not enough to make a significant difference in your total cholesterol.
Okay. So heart health, those blood vessels get healthy as well. What else?
Well, I think probably the next most compelling evidence is really in prenatal nutrition. So for mothers that are pregnant or nursing or thinking about getting pregnant, a lot of the brain development that happens in the baby happens in the womb, and DHA omega-3s specifically are a building block of the neurological system. They're the most prevalent fatty acid in the retina in the eyes. They're about a third of the dry weight of your brain. So they're pretty important and significant in building those cells. Another important aspect that we've started to see in recent years is that maternal consumption of DHA actually reduces your risk of very preterm birth. So these are births that are earlier than 34 weeks. And that's really significant. There's actually one study that came out that said that if we supplemented all pregnant mothers with DHA, we could reduce healthcare costs in the U.S. by $6 billion just by bringing down those preterm birth rates.
Wow. Speaking of pregnancy, Diana, who is one of the members of my closed Facebook group, my podcast posse, which, by the way, anybody can join. When I told everybody that I was having an expert on the show today, they started asking a bunch of questions. And so Diana says she wanted to know about breastfeeding. So if you are a breastfeeding mom and you're eating fatty fish or you're taking omega-3 supplements, will that get through the breast milk? And should you focus on diet? Should you focus on supplements? What's the preferred mode of getting omega-3s?
Well, diet's always the preferred mode because you're getting a package of nutrients and food item. And then, on top of that, if you are eating, say, a serving of salmon, you're less likely to eat something that's bad because you're already full, like a hamburger or something like that. So, it's really, diet's the optimal way. But for people who aren't fish eaters or don't want to try to incorporate fish into their diet, you can certainly take a supplement. In fact, most of the research has been done in this area on supplements. And part of the reason for that is because if you want to isolate the effect of omega-3 versus the other stuff in fish, you have to do it in a supplement form because you have to get that out of there.
So it gets through the breast milk, right? Either way.
It does, yeah. And there's lots of evidence that shows in human clinical trials that when you consume omega-3s either from fish or from supplements, the levels of breast milk go up. But if you're concerned about this, there's actually tests that you can take where you can order them on the internet. They come to your house or, they mail it to your house and you put a little bit of the breast milk in a vial and then you mail it into a lab and they'll tell you how much omega-3 is in your breast milk.
Really? What company does that?
There's a couple of companies that do it. One I'm aware of is OmegaQuant, which also does the omega-3 index test for blood levels. And I believe there's another one called Nutrisource Diagnostics that does breast milk levels as well.
Okay, good to know. What about concussions? Because when Simon and Josh both over the years have had concussions, I always buy supplements and I give them like 3 to 4 grams a day, high amounts. This is years ago I did this, but tell me about the research on concussion in terms of prevention, keeping the brain boosted, and then treating your kid who might get a concussion.
Yeah, concussions are an area that are very difficult to study because, if you're doing a typical randomized controlled trial, you give somebody the intervention, which in this case would be omega-3s, and then you would subject them to the injury. But, concussion, it's not really ethical to give people concussions.
No.
So they don't really study this in a way it's not a population that's very easy to study. And in addition to that, even concussion diagnosis is somewhat subjective. You don't really know whether you have long-term effects from multiple concussions until you die and they can autopsy your brain.
We're back to the brains. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so it's a very difficult area to research, but there is a lot of preliminary and anecdotal evidence of work in this area. I think that the most extreme cases are people who've had really bad traumatic brain injuries from car accidents, or there was a big story about a miner in, I think it was West Virginia, when there was a mine collapse there, and he was the only survivor, and he was brought out of the mine and was in a coma for weeks, and basically they were ready to give up on him, and as a last-ditch effort, they gave him really high doses of fish oil. You're talking, half a bottle of liquid fish oil a day, and it brought him out of the coma. So there's some very well-established cases like that, but they haven't been studied systematically. Because omega-3s are a very safe compound to take, There are doctors that are incorporating them into concussion protocols out there just in case they play a significant role. In fact, for anybody who's interested in this, there's a research institute called the Brain Health Education and Research Institute that has an omega-3 concussion protocol right on their website.
And that was, you said the Brain Health
Education and Research Institute.
Okay. I'm writing it down.
Yeah, it's Dr. Michael Lewis who runs that program, and he was actually a physician in the U.S. military and saw the effects in soldiers, and then after he got out of the military, he started this institute, and his focus is all about brain injuries and concussions.
Yeah, so, in my show notes, everyone, I will put a link to Dr. Michael Lewis's website, and I have been on his site. It's really great information. And so, if concussion is a concern, then definitely head on over and check him out. And Adam, I was watching something or reading something a while ago. JJ Virgin, who's a health guru, her son was in a car accident, and she also worked with her doctors on high doses of omega-3s. And he came out of, I don't know if it was a coma or he was really injured. And so you hear of these stories, and it's powerful stuff.
It is. And, I think the basic philosophy behind it, this is Michael Lewis's way of describing it, but the basic philosophy is that if your brain needs to heal and recover, you need to give it the nutrients that it's made of, because in order for the brain to recover, it needs to heal damage, which means healing damaged cells. And the only way it can do that is if it has the components that it's made of available to it. And since we know that you really can't get DHA any better way than direct consumption of it, that's why it's obviously very important.
That's right. Good stuff. All right. So I've got another question here from my podcast posse. This is from Teresa and Rachel, and both of them have kids with Crohn's disease. And so they want to know if taking fish oil for Crohn's disease is effective, and whether fish oil is better than, say, krill oil, because there's some buzz out there about the benefits of krill oil being more beneficial, say, than fish oil. So can you talk about irritable bowel disease, specifically Crohn's disease, and omega-3s?
Yeah, the Crohn's disease is one area where the science is all over the map. There's some studies that show it's been effective. Other people have tried to replicate those studies and have been unable to. And there's other studies that have just shown no effect at all. So unfortunately, that's an area where I don't think we really know if omega-3s play a role there. What I do know is that, Crohn's is a pretty serious condition, and what you're essentially trying to avoid are inflammatory triggers. And for some people who have seafood allergies or an intolerance, eating seafood can actually provide a little bit of an inflammatory trigger. So if you're in the wrong population, it may actually do more damage than good. So, it's not something that I think the evidence is clear on yet.
And what about krill versus fish oil?
With regard to Crohn's specifically, I think the evidence is just too early. There are some studies that have been done on krill oil, but they're small. And so I think we need to wait a little bit. But krill oil in general, if you're not looking at Crohn's disease specifically, krill oil in general provides some aspects or benefits that fish oils don't, and vice versa. Fish oils tend to have higher levels of EPA and DHA. Krill oils tend to be a little better absorbed, and so you don't necessarily have to take them with a meal all the time. In addition to that, a lot of people have reported that they don't get the fishy burp that they get with fish oil.
Okay. And krill is a little crustacean, right?
Yeah, it is. A lot of papers, or marine biologists say it's the largest biomass on Earth. There are more tons of krill on this planet than there are humans.
I can believe that. There's a lot of krill. I mean, that's what whales eat, right? Let's just segue then into supplements then. So, if you're eating seafood, we know we're supposed to eat 2 seafood meals a week, right? So if you're eating enough seafood, you should be covered. But if you don't eat enough seafood, then you might want to turn to a supplement. How much omega-3 should people aim to get each day? Throw a number at us.
Yeah, sure. Most expert scientific groups will recommend between 250 to 500 milligrams per day of EPA and DHA. And the tricky part is when you're reading the supplement label, that's not the size of the pill, actually, because you're consuming fish oil, which has a lot of other components to it, other fatty acids. So you have to turn the bottle around and look on the supplement facts panel for the amount of EPA and DHA per serving.
And so your goal is between 250 and 500, just a combo of the two?
Yes. So it depends on what your stage in life is. But for the general adult population, or even most kids, 250 to 500 milligrams is enough to meet your basic nutrition needs. If you're pregnant or lactating, most expert groups in that area will recommend another 200 to 600 milligrams of DHA.
On top of that?
On top of that.
Of DHAs?
Yeah, DHA specifically.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So there's lots of prenatal omega-3 products out there that have high levels of DHA in them specifically. So, those are easy products to turn to. And for those of your listeners that aren't fish eaters, there's also vegetarian versions of DHA.
That's very cool. From algae, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. So why more DHA? So if you're, say, lactating or you're pregnant, why would you want to boost your DHA?
Well, it's because in that last trimester of pregnancy, that's where a lot of the neurological development happens, and DHA is a key structural component of the neurological system. So in your eyes and your brains, there's a lot of DHA, and it needs to be available to the fetus to eat.
Okay, and the EPA is more cardiac, is that right?
Well, a lot of people have simplified it that way, but EPA also plays a role in the brain as well. It's pretty convincing now that EPA, for people who have depression, EPA helps them a lot more than DHA does.
I feel like this is, we always hear about superfoods. People talk about berries and, all different foods. I feel like salmon, like omega-3 is like the superfood because there are so many health benefits. It just amazes me. Hey, Karen from my podcast Posse, she says, at what age should babies get supplements? Should they get supplements?
Yeah, that's a good question. So most infant formula is fortified with DHA specifically because it's so important in brain development. And if you're consuming an infant formula, you're not generally breastfeeding. And so they're trying to replace the nutrients that you're not getting by not consuming breast milk. So if you're getting a formula, you're probably getting enough DHA. There is some variety, though, in infant formulas, and that's one of the things that's frustrated me with our grandson is when we were looking at different formulas for him, you can't really tell how much is in different infant formulas. It's not listed on the label for most brands, but they are almost all still fortified, so that's a good thing. There are supplements for babies that are liquid drops where you can add some to a bottle or a formula or breast milk, so you can top it up a little bit. I, of course, would never recommend a pill or anything like that for babies, but there are products that you can fortify infant formulas with.
Okay. So talk to your pediatrician then if you think maybe you're falling short.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. So I want to take just a little break and get into the food part of my show. And then we're going to go back and talk a little bit about some websites you can go to. Always Omega-3's is one where you could take a quiz to find out if you're getting enough omega-3. We'll talk a little bit more about supplements, but I just want to talk about seafood because that is just the easiest way to get omega-3s in your diet. And at the top of the show, I teased a recipe that I just created for teriyaki salmon, snow peas, and carrot packets. So I'm going to talk everybody through that. And then Adam, I'm going to have to ask you about some of your favorite recipes. But because I teased this at the top of the show, I don't want to wait any longer. Okay. So this recipe, which I hope you try too, this recipe has 1.6 grams of omega-3 fats. So that's about 1,600 milligrams per serving. So that's why when we say eat seafood twice a week, Adam's saying, the research shows get between 250 and 500 milligrams. You could see that over the course of the week, you're going to meet your needs, meet your goals if you're eating, say, salmon twice a week. And so this recipe, it's basically salmon in foil, right? You make salmon in these foil packets. So it's super simple. And you start off with light teriyaki sauce, brown sugar, toasted sesame oil, minced fresh ginger, or you can use ground, and a little bit of cornstarch. And then you just mix this sauce together and just set it aside. And the next thing you're going to do is you're going to take 4 pieces of tin foil, because this recipe serves 4, and make those pieces like 14 inches. Get the ruler out if you have to, but big enough that you're going to be holding this packet or creating this packet with salmon and veggies. And then the next thing you're going to do is you're going to take sugar snap peas. You're going to need 2 cups. That's 6 ounces. You're going to trim them, and you'll lay the sugar snap peas about half a cup over each of those pieces of foil. And then you're going to take a carrot, a large carrot, just peel it, and then cut it into these very thin matchstick strips. And then lay that evenly over each of the foil packets. So about a quarter cup of the carrot per packet. And then you're going to take your salmon. Now this is where you're going to need 4 pieces of salmon. Go for about 5 ounces per piece and have it skinned. When I grill salmon, I keep the skin on. But for this recipe, when you buy your fish at the seafood market or at the seafood counter at the supermarket, just ask them to skin it and then cut it into 4 of these 5-ounce pieces. So then lay the salmon on top of the veggies. And now you've got this teriyaki sauce, and you just want to kind of drizzle that evenly over each piece of salmon. And by the way, you can drizzle a little bit of salt and pepper on top of your salmon just to kind of season it. And then you want to fold up the foil, and you're going to create little pouches. And then those pouches go on top of a baking sheet, and you pop those in the oven, 350 degrees. And literally 18 minutes later, you pull everything out of the oven, very carefully open the packets because there's going to be a lot of steam inside, right? You've just done is you have steamed your veggies with your salmon. And the sauce thickens just a little bit because of the cornstarch. Very carefully open your packets and then transfer the veggies and the salmon to your dinner plates. And then I like to sprinkle toasted sesame seeds on top. And you could buy them at the market. I think these were like McCormick toasted sesame seeds that I just bought. So that's it. So easy, absolutely delicious. And then you're starting to kind of break down some of those barriers to adding seafood to your diet because it's easy. Number one, your kitchen doesn't smell fishy. By the way, if your kitchen ever smells fishy, the fish is not fresh. So there you have it. And just delicious. So anyway, that's my recipe. It's on the blog. I'll link to it from the show notes, and I hope you all try it. So what do you think, Adam?
That sounds great. So I used to be a chef a long time ago.
Oh, you never shared that with us at the top of the show. Why have you been holding back?
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding. But I have to say, I think ginger and citrus and things like that go really well with fish. And also just nutritionally, from a nutritional perspective, carrots are really important for your eyes and things like that. So, getting salmon with carrots and then adding ginger to it, it's a great sensory experience from a taste perspective, but also from a point of view of nutrition as well.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And that's kind of the goal for me whenever I'm making family dinners. I want it to taste great and I want it to be healthy. And then if you could get those veggies to taste great, and I will say that the carrots, the thinner you slice them, the more tender they will be. They're going to be a little bit on the crunchy side if they're a little bit bigger. Now, some kids really love crunchy. And some kids want it really tender. So you know your kids, right? I had made this the other day and I had some friends over and I said, I think the carrots are a little too crunchy. And my friend Wendy's like, no, I love them like this. So again, it's what you like, right? It's your preference. So what's your favorite, Adam? And I'm going to ask you about sardines in a minute, but what's your favorite salmon recipe, quote unquote, to make for your family?
We try a lot of different types of recipes. In some ways, I like simple things where it's just citrus and a little bit of sea salt and freshly ground pepper, thrown on a grill. It's a very quick, easy, great way to make it. I actually was visiting the FDA this week, and one of the people that works at the FDA told me that they make salmon all the time for their family, and they gave me this great recipe, which was that they marinate the salmon in a little bit of, low sodium soy sauce and lemon, and then just throw it on the grill. And then after it's grilled, they put a little bit of fresh ground pepper on it. And that's all it is. It's very simple. And that sounded really good. I want to try that. They just marinate it overnight and throw it on the grill the next morning.
Wow. Overnight.
Next day. Sorry. Next day.
Okay. I love to take smoked salmon. I grew up eating lox and bagels and cream cheese. So I love buying smoked salmon, AKA lox. And then I am addicted to avocado toast. And so I'll toast up some bread, preferably whole grain. And then I smush avocado on the bread. I might give it a little bit of a drizzle of a little lime juice or a little lemon juice, salt and pepper. And then I just lay the smoked salmon on top. Now you could take this to a whole new level by taking hard-boiled eggs, slicing those up, adding that, because it's a great breakfast. You can add some pickled beets. This summer I was pickling beets like crazy. It's really anything goes when it comes to avocado toast. And now you add that smoked salmon. So you get the kind of creamy lusciousness of the avocado and then that nice saltiness of the smoked salmon. So that's a great way to get salmon at breakfast even, because this is something that I eat for breakfast.
Well, that's in a lot of cultures around the world do. Certainly, the Northern Europeans, they all eat smoked fish in their diet. I actually saw something on Facebook the other day that was very similar to what you just described, where they take these strips of smoked salmon and they put it inside a bowl, and they basically create a wall of smoked salmon around the outsides of the bowl. And then they take a poached or hard-boiled egg and set it inside the bowl, and then smash up a bunch of avocado and throw it on. And then you can take the bowl and flip it upside down onto a plate, and you've got a nice little self-contained vessel of salmon and smashed avocado. It looked amazing.
Was that like a little bowl, I'm thinking?
Yeah, just like a little ice cream or dessert bowl.
Oh, that sounds really good. I have on my website a recipe for corny salmon cakes where you just use canned salmon as kind of the main attraction in the recipe. And it's inexpensive, it's accessible, it's easy. And then you mix it with a bunch of ingredients like frozen corn kernels that you thaw out, a little bit of breadcrumbs, some shredded cheese, some seasoning. And then you make these little cakes, a little egg in there. You make these corny salmon cakes. And I love that recipe because it is so easy. And it's salmon, exactly. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Canned salmon's a great, very inexpensive source of seafood in your diet.
Since October is National Seafood Month, I reached out to a bunch of my blogger friends, dietitian bloggers, and I asked them to share their family's favorite seafood recipe. And I got a lot of responses. And so I put them together in a blog post. And I was just going through it. And every recipe, of course, looks like something I would want to make. But there's one recipe in there that Jenny from My Cape Cod Kitchen has for crunchy walnut crusted salmon patties. And she uses the canned salmon. So similar, to my salmon cakes where you start with canned salmon and then she uses walnuts in the crust. Now, I know we talked earlier how walnuts have the short chain omega-3s and it does not convert that well to the long chain. So for good measure, she used a little bit of the crunchy walnuts as a coating for her salmon cakes.
Well, and walnuts are still healthy, and so are the short-chain omega-3s. So that's a great recipe. Walnuts also have a lot of other things in them that help reduce cholesterol, like the fibers and stuff like that. That's a great nutritionally balanced recipe.
Yeah. And walnuts, whether you want them, for snacking or in baking, super nutritious. Also in that roundup, I was laughing when I was going through it because there's this huge cooking trend, sheet pan dinners, right? Where you just use one baking sheet or two baking sheets and everything goes on that sheet pan, one pan in the oven, and it's easy, in terms of cleanup and prep. And so Lindsay from the Lean Green Bean blog has a recipe for salmon and green beans, and she uses Italian salad dressing to flavor the fish. And that's it. I mean, it's one of these like 4-ingredient dinners, so that's super easy. And then the other recipe that I'm itching to make is from Anne, who blogs over at Fantastic Food. And she uses for her sheet pan dinner, she's got this mixture of salmon, and then she's got asparagus, green beans, and bell peppers. And she creates this glaze for this salmon that is so amazing. It's soy sauce, maple syrup, sesame oil, ginger, and garlic. And it's just gorgeous. And this is a sheet pan dinner, huge trend. I got to do a podcast on it at some point.
That sounds great.
And then the other recipe that, so many caught my eye, but this one from Carmen at the Nutrition Adventure. She's got tacos. We haven't even talked about tacos. And she blackens salmon. She just does that stovetop with some seasonings. And then she adds charred corn, avocado, Mexican cheese into her tacos. And this recipe is gorgeous. You could add cilantro. And so it's versatile. There's just so much you can do with salmon. But what about sardines? What do we do with sardines, Adam?
Yeah, sardines are an interesting little fish there because a lot of people really don't like the flavor of them. If you ever get the chance to have fresh sardines, those are incredible grilled. And they don't take long to grill at all, and you can just put a little bit of sea salt on them and maybe a little bit of olive oil. They just taste fantastic. But if you're not able to get fresh sardines, I think there's still lots of things you can do with them. I mean, sardines are so packed full of omega-3s that you don't need to eat the same serving size as a serving of salmon, for instance. They actually have even higher levels of omega-3. So, you can incorporate them into a salad, like you find anchovies in a Caesar salad. You can incorporate them in that way. I think it's always best to really grill them. If you're into making sushi, they do make a good sushi, though. But I actually think that it takes a lot of work because sardines are a lot smaller. But if you take just a little sardine fillet and then wrap it in another fish like a tuna or a salmon, it's actually a really nice complement in the sushi.
I am determined to like sardines, so I'm working it. I'm working my way. In fact, Adam, I ran into Adam, everybody, at the International Seafood Show in Boston, right? A couple months ago. And when I walked through there, I had this mission. I'm going to learn to love sardines. And I went by the Portugal booth. And the Portuguese do a lot of canning with sardines. And they had some of them marinating in olive oil, lemon juice, different seasonings in the little tins. And they were pretty good, I have to say. But I'm still warming up to them. And I know that they're so high in omega-3s. So I want to learn to love them. It's a goal.
Well, one way that you might like is to make a little white wine and butter sauce. They're really good cooked that way. And then just put a little fresh ground pepper in them. It's really excellent. And of course, squeeze a little lemon on top of them. That's a great way to cook sardines.
I'm going to work on that. Hey, for somebody who wants to know if they're getting enough omega-3s in their diet, I don't like to eat clinically. Like, I don't want people to worry every time they eat something. Oh my gosh, am I getting enough of this? I want people to eat because food tastes great. But in general, where can people go to take your quiz?
Yeah, so we have a website for consumers that has a lot of different resources on omega-3s, but it's at alwaysomega3s.com. And that's all one word, no hyphen or anything. And on that website, there's a quiz that's right on the front page that you can basically enter in a few questions about how many servings of seafood have you had in the last week of different types of seafood, like fatty fish, salmon, tuna, or whitefish, like cod or pollock. And then also how many omega-3 supplements you might have taken last week. And that will give you an estimate of how much you're getting in your diet and how much further you have to go in order to reach a 500 milligram a day target.
Okay, yeah. So alwaysomega3s.com. And I will give everybody a link to that. And the GOED website, that's really just for your members, right?
Yeah, that's more of an industry organization site where we have a lot of technical information on helping companies produce high quality omega-3s, how they handle the oil for oxidation and stuff. And so it's a pretty technical site. Always Omega-3s is really much more geared towards helping consumers distill the science, figure out how much they're getting, hear some of the latest news in the omega-3.
Okay, good stuff. So for my podcast posse folks who wanted to know about krill oil and fish oil and Crohn's disease, would they be able to find any research studies on that Always Omega site or the Always Omega-3 site? Where could they go for that?
Yeah, for general things like heart health, brain health, eye health, prenatal health, there's resources on that website. For more specific conditions like Crohn's, there's not as much information there. What I would recommend is the NIH has a website on omega-3s, so you can just search for NIH omega-3 overview, and I'm sure it'll pop right up. That's a really good site. There are also a couple of groups like the Natural Standards Medicine Database, which I believe is what WebMD uses. So if you go to WebMD, you might be able to search omega-3s and Crohn's disease and see what they say too. But they try to distill the research down around a wide variety of conditions. I think that the drawback there is there's 200 to 300 human clinical trials being published every year now on omega-3s, so those websites don't keep up fast enough for all the science that's being produced.
Sure. Okay. So, Adam, you've got this chef background, even though you held that information from us till pretty much the end of the show. Where were you a chef? And if you could recommend a favorite cookbook to our listeners, your favorite cookbook as a dad, a grandfather, a chef, what would it be?
Sure. Well, I was actually a chef in Tokyo at a Spanish restaurant.
Okay.
So that was a long time ago, more than, almost 25 years ago. That's sad that much time has passed. But yeah, and I have a real affinity for Spanish food. I actually lived in Barcelona as well for a while. I wasn't a chef there, but to me, it's what they do with food and seafood in particular is, some of the most amazing things that any chef produces. Well, everybody who's a foodie has heard of a restaurant called El Bulli, and they were for many years ranked the best restaurant in the world. But there's actually a cookbook called El Bulli that it has a lot of recipes from the restaurant. So I really recommend that one for anybody that's really adventurous and wants to learn more about some advanced cooking techniques.
And is there a chef that you would love or a cookbook author that if you could meet, you'd love to hang out with them?
Oh, yeah. Jose Andres, by far. He's a Spanish chef, but he is relocated here to the United States. And he has restaurants all over the country, in D.C., Las Vegas, other places. He's really gregarious. He's a really nice guy. I'd love to meet him. And he used to work at El Bulli in Barcelona.
Well, there you go. There you go. Fantastic. Hey, I forgot to ask you this. Farm raised, and then I got to let you off the hook here. My gosh, but farm raised versus wild salmon. I personally prefer the flavor of farm raised. Do you have a preference in terms of flavor? And is there any difference in the nutrition, the omega-3s?
There are differences. I actually prefer wild salmon, but for a good chunk of my life, I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, and I used to love catching salmon. So I have a affinity for wild salmon that goes beyond the taste profile and the nutritional profile. But there are differences, and wild salmon now tend to have more EPA and DHA than farm salmon, but farm salmon are still an excellent source and are often more economical. The omega-3s in salmon really depend on what they're eating. And so in farm-raised salmon, they've shifted a lot of the feed to vegetable oils that provide high omega-6s and ALA omega-3, the short-chain omega-3s that you mentioned. So that's really what's getting into the farm salmon today. They're working in that industry to try to improve the nutritional profile. So in a few years, there might be as much omega-3 again in farm salmon as wild salmon. In fact, if you go to the USDA's website, they actually say farm salmon has more EPA and DHA, but that's because they were testing farm salmon from 10, 15 years ago. And the industry's changed a lot since then.
But if you enjoy farm raised, eat it, go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's still a great source of EPA and DHA.
And it is less expensive, and there's good, industry standards out there, so people can feel good about it. I go to Whole Foods, I get my farm raised there, and a lot of the smoked salmon I get is farm raised. The shrimp I get is farm raised. Yeah, so tilapia is farm raised, so that there's a lot of great fish sources out there. And if you love white fish, you're going to get some omega-3s, right? You're just not going to get as much, like a haddock or a cod, let's say.
Oh, yeah. And cod is one of my favorite fish to cook with. It's a great, versatile fish. So, yeah, and it's a good source of omega-3s as well.
Okay, good stuff. Well, Adam, is there anything else you want to say about omega-3s or salmon or seafood? I want to remind people that thank you, Adam and GOED. We have a great giveaway going on the show notes page for salmon and a cookbook and a marinade. And so I want you to check out that gift box. But anything else that you want to share?
Yeah, I think I would say that one of the things we see frequently is that there's a lot of barriers to getting families to incorporate seafood into their diets. And I think there are things that are manageable. One issue is, I won't endorse this method, but this is the method we use. We're going to make a confession here about how bad of a parent I am. But in order to get our kids to eat seafood when they were really little, we called it chicken and they ate it just fine. But the minute they found out it was fish, they stopped eating it. So there's some emotional barriers there that you have to kind of overcome that are, often not even tied to the taste. There are kids who've never had fish before will just think, oh, fish is gross, even though they've never had it. Mm-hmm. So, you have to do a little massaging there. The other thing I would say is for people who are really concerned about the taste is that there are great, easy ways to manage that issue. Like you said, the fresher the fish, the better. So go out and try to get the freshest fish possible. In addition, I would say that, you can try to cook the fish in a way where you're not abusing it. You want fish to be tender and flaky. You don't want it to be something that's dry and overcooked, and that really contributes to the fishiness of the taste. So, make sure you don't cook it too long. Remember that a lot of fish is eaten as sushi, so it's raw. So you don't need to cook it till it's really dry. It can be moist and tender. And, then there's other things you can do too. Like one of my favorite things to do with cod, for instance, is cold cod can actually stick to a pan really easily, like an aluminum pan. And that's because when fish is cold, it has a chemical reaction with the pan. So, you can either let it warm up to room temperature, and actually that ends up yielding a better flavor because you're not burning as much of the fish. Or another trick is you can take it and dip it one side in a little bit of egg and then in some breadcrumbs, and then put that side into the pan, and then it will warm up naturally, and you'll have a nice crust on one side of it, a nice crispy finish to it.
Fantastic. Yeah, well, I love seafood. And you know what? Mommy confession, when my kids were younger, maybe not with them, but when they had friends over, if I was ever making like a fish stick, because I have this recipe for salmon, Asian salmon sticks, I would say it's chicken. Same thing. What the heck?
Yeah.
Why not? Why not? But it tastes so good. Well, Adam, thank you so much for joining us today. It's really been great having you on the show to give us the whole lowdown on omega-3s.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. It's been my pleasure. And, if anybody has any questions about omega-3s, I'm happy to answer them by email or other ways too. So.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll have you come on to the Posse page and weigh in if anybody has more questions. So people can head on over to alwaysomega3s.com if they want to get some great information. That's a great place to start.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. And for all of you listening today, be sure to head on over to Liz's Healthy Table. My show notes will include the resources from today's show, the recipe we talked about for salmon in foil packets, and a link to that fantastic seafood recipe roundup. If you love the show, I welcome you to head on over to iTunes and post a review. And by all means, join the podcast posse. Until next time, thanks for listening to Liz's Healthy Table.